So starting off, we have shoulder abduction and adduction. So an example of this would be side lateral raises with dumbbells. So when you're looking at abduction, so meaning it's going away from your body, the muscles are, so muscles, first of all, I'll preface this, muscles are always pulling. So when you're going to abduction, the supraspinatus and the three deltoid heads, so the anterior, medial, and posterior deltoid heads will be pulling to pull the arm up. And next, when you go into adduction, so when the arms are going towards the body, the pec major, latissimus dorsi, teres major, and the coracobrachialis will pull the arm back. So it's just a matter of agonist and antagonist muscles. So when you're going into abduction, those three deltoid heads and the supraspinatus are the agonist, and then when you're going to adduction, the pecs, lats, teres major, coracobrachialis will be agonist, and so on and so forth. While we're on the subject of like the shoulder area, we can talk about protraction and retraction. So for protraction, it's like this, and retraction is like this. So protraction, essentially like what it is, it's laterally and anteriorly moving the shoulder towards the chest, and then retraction is the opposite. It's moving posteriorly and medially behind. So an example, well, I have two examples actually. So for protraction, a good cue for deadlifting is to protract your shoulders, not be overly rounded, but protract your shoulders to allow the greatest length possible for your arms, because it is a very leverage-based lift. And then the opposite would be found in the bench press, because the whole idea is to reduce the range of motion in which your joints have to move, and to create less work for your body when you're pressing the weight off your chest. For hip flexion and extension, the greatest example I can give is the squat. So when you're squatting, for any movement, there's an eccentric and concentric phase of the movement. For the squat, the eccentric part of the movement would be when you're lowering into the ground, and then the concentric would be when you're going back up. So in a movement, the eccentric will always be the strongest part of the lift because the muscle is lengthening, and then for the concentric, it's the opposite, so it will be shortening. So for hip, medial, and lateral rotation, I don't really have an exercise example, but if you ever sit like this, then you've pretty much been doing lateral rotation your whole life, and doing that limits your ability to do medial rotation, which is this one right here. So there's a thing called like adaptive shortening. So when you sit with your legs crossed like that, you're adaptively shortening the muscles that are pertaining to that movement, and over time and with a lot of repetition, you cause it to constantly be short, and the other part, so the medial rotation, will be constantly lengthened. So it'll create tightness, and it limits your ability to move. So lastly, we have spinal extension or back extension. It's essentially just bending the spine backwards in order to get an arch. So if you ever wake up in the morning, stretch when you wake up to feel a little bit better. There's also yoga poses and many others. Another example again is if we refer back to the bench press, when a lifter is setting up, they'll arch their back to help reduce the range of motion along with retracting their shoulders. So say for example, this is the anterior side of the body, the head is here, and this is the posterior side. So if they're in the supinated position, the muscles will always pull. So because muscles always pull, they'll pull, and that's what creates the arch in the back there. So what planes and axes would these movements be in? So for the frontal plane, the movements you'd see in there would be shoulder abduction and adduction, as well as hip, medial, and lateral rotation, and that would be in the sagittal axis. Conversely to that, what would be in the sagittal plane and in the coronal axis would be everything else. So you have shoulder protraction and retraction, hip flexion and extension, and lastly, spinal extension. And the last part of the assignment is the tensegrity model. So I have a model here made of straws and rubber bands, and the idea with tensegrity is supposed to represent muscles, tendons, and fascia. So it's a system where it's designed to help you maintain stability and be able to have movement. So this doesn't look equal at all. It looks very chaotic actually, and I left it like that partly because I couldn't really get it to stabilize, but looking at the factors here, the rubber bands, they're not all the same length, so it's a good way to relate to our bodies. So if we're not able to have it structurally symmetrical all the way around, it does tell us about how we're living our daily lives. So lots of bad habits can lead to bad posture, something like that, and shortened and lengthened muscles that stay shortened and lengthened, which leads to our bodies looking like this in a way. And other parts will be able to be moved much easier, whereas other parts will be hard to move at the same time. So that's how I can sum up tensegrity.